welcome back to the RevRx podcast, where we show you how to thrive in faith, family, and health. My name is Chad Potts, and I'm your host. Today, I'm so excited to introduce to you my special guest, Mandy Pallock. Mandy is the author of The Question Habit and someone who's really built a life around the power of curiosity. Maybe you felt stuck in surface level conversations. Maybe you're trying to connect with your spouse, with your kids, or even with God, but the words just don't seem to go very deep. What if I told you that the right question asked the right time could change everything? That's what Mandy's all about, intentional curiosity. In this episode, we dig deep about how asking good questions helps to build resilient relationships. We're going to talk about how to spark real conversations in your marriage, why it's okay to ask God hard questions, and how Jesus himself used questions to connect, teach, and transform. This episode is a powerful reminder that connection doesn't have to be complicated. Maybe your relationship transformation is just on the other side of a couple well-asked questions. So without further ado, I introduce you to my friend, Mandy Pallock. Mandy, thank you so much for joining us today on the RevRx podcast. What a privilege it is to have you here with us.
Oh man, on a scale of 1 to 10, I've got to be a 12. How excited I am to be here. Thank you, Chad. Appreciate it.
Yes, it's an honor, and love to just delve into some conversations with you. I'd mentioned I follow you on social media. We'll put some links, of course, to all that in the show notes. But you're putting out a lot of great content when it comes to relationships, when it comes to faith. You're really building on a lot of that with your book that you've written. But before we get into all that, I'd just love to know a little more about you. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of how you reached the point where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Mandy Pallock, and I live in Southeast Texas. I'm happily married to the man of my dreams, and we are raising 3 kiddos together. And it's a wild, crazy adventure, as anyone who's raising kids knows. I have a background in photography and production and supporting nonprofits, and I'm all about asking why. And it really started not because I was inherently curious, but because I was inherently shy. And I remember picking the seat to sit in my car, our car as a kid, knowing that if I sat in the front seat, that's where all the conversations were going to happen. And if I sat in the back left seat, I could daydream and read a book. And so, as that process happened, I had this amazing dad who would consistently and tenaciously invite me into a conversation seat. We called them the talking seats. And he'd ask questions. And, I wasn't always good at them. And I still am not always good at answering questions. But that practice and that kindness of just someone wanting to get to know me, it really gave me an appreciation for questions. And so I first started asking questions because I realized if I got somebody else talking, I didn't have to get to talk.
And, it's the introvert's secret weapon, right?
It really is. It is. And so then it's just kind of grown from there. But that's me.
Well, you and I think I guess you would relate to the introvertedness. I'm an introvert as well.
Yes.
And so we may just sit here and ask questions back and forth.
I like it. It's a conspiracy.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I love that. And, there's a degree of relatability to what you said. Especially if you are on that introverted spectrum, which I definitely am. I'm the daydreamer, sit in the back and read a book. If only I didn't get car sick, of course.
Oh no!
But yeah, questions are so important.
Mm-hmm.
I shared with you just a minute ago. I had a family member tell me they remember taking me on a trip when I was little, and the biggest thing they remember was that I asked a ton of questions. And I still do that today. I'm very much kind of a why guy. I want to know how things work. I want to know what makes you tick. I want to learn more about other people. It's how I explore the world around me. So I've always been kind of naturally drawn to the question habit. Like that made me really want to delve in and kind of see what you're about. Can you just introduce us to the concept of asking questions? You've kind of done that in your past, but give us just a premise for your book, kind of what drove you to to kind of go out on a limb and write about it.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, Chad. So my book is called The Question Habit, and it's all about building resilient relationships with God and others, one question at a time. And you said you love asking questions and you're a why guy. You're in really good company. Like in the Gospels, Jesus asked somewhere in the vicinity of 288 questions, depending on which version you're looking at, which is astounding.
It is.
That Jesus used this powerful tool as a way to teach and minister and inspire and cultivate and mentor. And, when we're asking questions, we're emulating the very best source. And really, God made us to be curious. He made us to wonder why and to explore and discover. And, swapping out a period for a question mark, it's one of those great ways that we as humans can discover what we don't know, and what we don't know, we don't know. And it's a way that we as believers can really discover effective ways to mentor and encourage other people. So yeah, that's one reason I'm pretty excited about questions.
Awesome. So how might questions enable us to better get to know one another?
Mm-hmm.
How does that help us in relationships? I know it's kind of a big question, but
Mm-hmm.
What would be your take on that? And then maybe we can delve into some more specific points.
Yeah, for sure. Just sitting here thinking, I think when you ask me a question, I'm just because you're an amazing human who wants to get to know me. And that says a lot to me as a person. Like, here's someone who values me as a person enough that they're going to ask a question and want to get to know me. And so when we're asking other people questions, whether that's someone in the checkout line, or it's our spouse, or it's a coworker, or it's actually our child, when we ask those questions, we are saying, I value you, I see you, and I want to get to know you.
Yeah.
And I think, Chad, that's like the first step in asking questions is to recognize that we're speaking to someone made in the image of God, that regardless of their background or their worldview or their context, they're made in the image of God.
Yes.
And when we bring that holy understanding to a conversation, the sky's the limit on where it's going to go.
Absolutely. It does show a great amount of care and concern, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When I care enough about you to ask a question, to get to know you better,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. I mean, it works the same way.
Yeah.
And that's really, that's a relationship builder.
Mm-hmm.
That's a relationship starter of sorts.
It really is. It really is. And we all know, like, when somebody asks us a question just to be polite, like they're looking over our shoulder,
Right.
They're checking the score, they're thinking about their response. We know what that feels like. And so really, when we can offer this sincere, listening, attentive care to someone, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a way of being present.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that part of the question habit as well. So getting into there's several different areas that you've written about that we can ask questions, and I believe do they all start with a D, or they have like some aspect of alliteration there, or do's, or something like that?
Yeah.
Hold on, let me see.
I better look, Chad.
Let's see. Well, what I'm referring to, and I'll edit all this out, of course.
Yeah.
There's so I downloaded your from your website the question list.
Well, there we go. Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So there's the dream,
tracking.
the do,
yes.
the yeah.
Yes. Okay, I'm tracking. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Sorry, yeah.
No, you're great.
So dream, do, I do, and we don't have to talk about all those, but maybe we can just kind of single out a couple of those.
Absolutely.
So as part of your work, there are these, I guess we'll call them pillars of questions that we can ask. And I'd love to delve into a couple of those with you, one of them being like dream questions and I do questions and things like that. Could you help us navigate through some of that, just help us to understand really how those things are beneficial in our life?
Yeah. So it started when I was this introverted nerd who was trying to come up with ways to actually have a non-awkward conversation with someone. And so I just started collecting these different conversation prompts, and I would put them on note cards, or I would put them on my phone. And now I carry them around on my phone. I would take them and put them on the back of a deck of cards and say, draw a card, like that kind of idea. And eventually, as I started adding to that, I realized that they really kind of organized themselves over stages of life and seasons of life. And so, on my website, I have a collection of free conversation starters that are organized around those stages of life. Like, so dream, questions that you might ask yourself or someone else when you're in that life purpose stage of dreaming about what you might do and what that world changing endeavor might look like. And then I do is that whole, what would you do if you're in a relationship and you think, well, am I going to say I do to someone? What might be some relationship building questions? And then, I do with a question mark is the ones that you would ask your spouse after the fact as you're still, wanting to invest in that relationship. And then what did we just do is, questions that you might ask as a parent, either for yourself and your role as a parent or that you might ask your kiddos. And so it just builds from that. But it's, and there's cross pollination, but it's a fun way to think through, like at this stage of life that I'm in, or at this stage of life that my conversation partner is in, what are questions that might deeper conversations?
Yeah. I love that. So let's talk about spouse. What are some ideas you have, and really what are some benefits of some of these conversation starters? Maybe some real life examples of how this has kind of helped you in your relationship with your husband. You guys have got 3 kids. I have 3 kids too, so I know the wonderful mess that can be. So maybe we'll go there next. But I'm just kind of putting some practical steps into this. These are great conversation starters, but where in your relationship with your spouse and with your kids have you found this particularly helpful?
Absolutely. When several weeks ago, my husband Peter and I went on a date, and then we went to this restaurant. We're like, hey, we both have some interesting food challenges. We found this restaurant we both can eat at, and we're so excited. So we get our food, we sit down, and we look at each other, and it's like, what's next?
Yeah.
And so I was like, wait a minute. I had 3 questions just in my calendar calendar item on my phone that were questions I wanted to talk to him about because they'd come up in that week. I just jotted them on that calendar event, and I knew that we didn't have to worry about it until then, but it was going to be a conversation starter. And it was. And we had a great conversation. We got to 2 of them, and he just smiles and waits for me to look up the question because I can't remember it, and it works. And I love that it's both intentional and freeing to know, like, if you're collecting these questions as you go, and then you're thinking specifically about someone, and then it brings a curiosity and an intentionality to those times. Because, those date nights are pretty rare, pretty special. You want to make the most of them and really invest in that relationship when and where you can.
That's exactly right. That's why I mentioned the kids too, because sometimes it feels like, that's all you talk about. So, it's good to have some of these questions, because in the moment it's hard.
Yeah.
But being intentional about it.
Yes.
And saying, all right, this is coming up. Let me plan a little bit. And it doesn't always have to be planned and intentional. But I think probably the more you do, the better you get at it, like anything else. Absolutely.
And Chad, probably one of the more fascinating aspects of that is to see how answers and questions change over the years. I love that, as my husband and I have been married for 14 years now, to just kind of think, over that time, what has stayed the same, what has changed. And that's a beautiful reflection of a relationship too.
Awesome. What about with your kids? And I'm sure different ages, there's different sets of questions, but
yes,
what's been some ways that you found that to be really helpful in engaging them?
Yeah. So one thing before I jump into answering the question is the acknowledgement that some days you're going to ask a question and it's going to inspire this amazing, deep, soul stirring conversation. And then most days you're going to ask a question and you're going to get a grunt. Or you're going to get an eye roll. And that is okay. Like that's the reality of this, that both in our asking questions, we're giving them the safety, the security, the opportunity to think through those answers. And then also the resilient relationship part where they know there's a safety and security in this and that we're not going away. Like we're going to stick with it. We're going to keep asking questions, keep investigating, keep initiating those relational conversations. And it reminds me of a painting, like the best paintings, they're made like a brushstroke at a time. And as a sketch at a time. And that's what these conversations are about too. And so a quick illustration of that is A while ago, I took my kids on our first ski trip, and it was just so much fun. And so, our youngest is this adorable pink marshmallow, and then our middle kid discovers he has a penchant for flying through the trees until he loses everything. And then our oldest one, he doesn't really care how he does it; he just wants to do it fast. And with that, every lift line was an opportunity for a conversation. And every time on that lift chair was a chance to say, hey, what do you think about that last run? Or did you see that guy? And just really, it's that brushstroke of a relationship and what that gives. And I love that, as we're all a part of that together, they start asking questions too. They become like you as that curious kid in the car asking those questions. And so it creates this culture of curiosity that's just so healthy.
I'm getting it back now, by the way. My kids are 3, 5, and 7, and tons of questions, but I don't discourage that at all.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's just the way we engage with our world, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, there's actually research that's so fascinating, like how many questions that kids ask. And they ask somewhere like 20,000 questions between birth and 4. And like, that's a lot. And it's so beautiful because it's another idea. I said 20,000. It's actually 40,000 questions between the ages of 2 and 5. And, that's only 28 questions a day. And so other people are like, it's actually more like 100 or 200. But God made us to be curious. And every question is an opportunity to invest and discover and cultivate.
Yeah, I love that. Let me transition a little bit and ask you about the role of questions in our faith. And that can look a lot. We mentioned a minute ago that, when we're asking questions in the, with the example of Jesus.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my books I pulled out for this interview, it's an old book, but it's called Questions of Jesus.
Ooh.
And it's just one that I've come across years ago.
Yeah.
It's a little devotion. I mean, I think it's maybe like 100 of them. And it's just every question that Jesus asked, or not every question, but every prompt is a question that Jesus asked. And it talks about really the heart that he was getting to by asking that question. And so you can see my brain has kind of been around this for years. I love the idea of curiosity and with questions. But where does that come in our faith? What are some different ways that you see the importance of questions in our faith? Because there are questions we may have about our faith. There may be questions we have about God. Sometimes we're scared to voice those or really even admit we have those.
Yeah.
But what really is the point of asking that question, and how does that play a role in our faith?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about questions that Jesus asked. It reminds me of specifically Matthew 20. It's the story of these 2 blind men that are on the side of the road and they're crying out for mercy. And Jesus stops and he asks them, he says, what do you want me to do for you?
Yeah.
He doesn't rush to solve their problem. He doesn't put words in their mouth. He doesn't answer for them, but he waits for their reply. Which is that our eyes would be opened. And then is the time, after that recognition, that he touches their eyes and he gives them healing. And so we can learn from that. And that here is Jesus inviting people to answer his own questions. And then we can see other times where he invites people to ask him questions.
Right.
And so, we ask, they're like, well, is it a good idea to question God, or should we question? And I'm a really simple person when it comes down to that. I'm like, the God of the universe knows my questions, whether I verbalize them or not.
It's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
So I better just go straight to the source and take them to him and trust that he's going to be the one who, when I ask these big questions, the big ones, the why is there pain in the world? Why did this hard thing happen? What were you thinking? What's going on? Like when you are bumping into those big questions, those are the ones that we can take to God. And when we take those questions to God, and then we actually wait for a response, and we actually listen for a response, like that becomes a conversation.
It
And
does.
that's what a conversation is all about. And one of the beautiful things that's at our fingertips for someone who is a believer and someone who's searching for Jesus. Because God says, draw close to me and I will draw close to you. So when we're asking those questions, he's gonna listen and he's gonna respond.
Well, and I love that you took us there, because that's the way I see it too.
Mm-hmm.
When we ask these questions of God, his ego is not bruised.
Yeah. Who
So
knows?
his feelings are not upset. He's the God of the universe. He's big enough to handle our questions. But here's the thing, it invites a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that part that you brought out. Just like when I ask you a question, it invites a conversation. It's the same way with God. When we ask him a question, it invites a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't doubt that God speaks in lots of different ways today. The question is whether we're listening.
Yes.
And if we're asking those questions, we're bringing them to him. I think he's faithful to do that. And we may not understand. We may not understand the answers to those questions. We may not see that on this side of eternity, but I don't think it's an unhealthy thing to bring our questions to him.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's the same nature of a question, isn't it? It's curiosity. We're curious creatures. God made us that way.
Mm-hmm.
We're curious about each other. We're curious about the world around us. And, so he's not threatened when we have those. But if we see it as a way to foster that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
you said it earlier, a conversation starter.
Mm-hmm.
It's a conversation starter with God. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing, and he welcomes it and invites it. So yeah, think of your prayer as a conversation starter with God, and then actually wait for the response.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings up another point about faith, and a lot of the content you put out is faith related. One of the things that drew me to you was that. What role does your faith play in your life with the mission that you have with the Question Habit, with all that you've got going on? Can you just kind of walk us through a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I passionately believe that as we interact with God's word, that our lives are going to change. And so that's been the thing that's made all the difference in my life, is spending time with God through his word and getting to know him more in that context. And so as I'm drawing close to him, he is drawing close to me. And I see that in other people as well, as we have that common desire to know God through his word, it changes lives. And we can see that when you say, hey, let's look at questions in scripture, and where we see God asking questions of people and where you see people asking questions of God. That's actually how the book started, was as a study in that context. And it becomes a really enriching thing. It's all great. Like, you can say it was really important, right? And you can say on a happy day, you can say, yes, it makes all that difference. But the bigger reason is on the really hardest days. Like, on the really hardest days, that difference. And I remember driving, being this like Sunday morning, and I'm driving to church, and the my passenger seat was empty and the back seats were full of car seats, and I was driving to church one more time by myself, knowing that I was going to encounter these well-intentioned but coming across to me as super judgmental people that are going to say, and where's your husband today? And why couldn't he come? And because he was curled up on the couch back at the house, in this fetal position of pain. And we were going through the process of figuring out what in the world was going on. And since then, God has, it's come out that, like, there's some autoimmune issues and a couple genetic issues, and it's this one big, huge ball of wax, right? But on this drive, Chad, I was talking with Jesus.
Yeah.
I was like, Jesus, this is hard. And this is really hard. Is this actually what you had planned? Because just that night before, I had remembered, like, my husband is in bed, the kids are in bed, it's quiet, and I'm sitting there thinking, did I actually vow in sickness and in health, or in sickness or in health? Because we've got all the sickness part, and, like, did I vow that there'd be some, I'm just like really thinking through that. And so I went and I dug up my vows and I dug up the recording, and what do you know? I actually said or. And so it's this little reminder, like, Mandy, yeah, you're in this. and you're in it for the long haul because you promised and you vowed, and that's a beautiful thing. And it's okay that it's hard, like it's hard. And so here I am on the way to church, and in this moment, as I'm having this conversation with Jesus, I just feel his response. And it's something along the lines of, yes, Mandy, I know it's hard. Would you really be satisfied with anything that was an unchallenged, unmotivated life? And if I'm honest, I'm still kind of pondering through my answer.
That's a big question.
It is. It really is.
I love that he answered your question with a question.
But it was a conversation, and it still is. And we must be able to ask God those big, hard questions and know that he's trustworthy enough to hold our hearts and those questions all together.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's super powerful. Realizing that the God of the universe cares enough about you to hear your cries, to hear your questions, and to respond in a way that challenges you, that moves you, that lets you know that, hey, I have a peace about this, whether good, bad, health, and or whatever the case may be.
100%.
He's there. Going into the part about would you really be happy with anything that was not a challenge?
Yeah.
Our flesh wants to cry out and say, yeah, I'd be fine with that.
Right.
Please and thank you.
Yes.
Can we get a rush order on that?
Sign me up, thanks.
Right. But life's rarely that way. And I would dare say that anything worth having is generally not that way. Am I right?
I would agree with you.
Yeah. And I, you've realized that, and in various ways I have too in my life. And the things worth having are things that are worth fighting for, and that's the thing you have to fight for.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And with that, that's another reason that questions are a powerful tool for someone who is in that moment, right? If you're in a moment, I feel like either I let it I just survive it because I'm in survival mode, or I miss that something is happening, right? And so if I'm in a spot where I can ask questions, then those are really clarifying. If I can say, what's the most challenging thing happening to me right now? And what's one thing that I could do that might adjust my response to it, or my, if I can just ask those really simple, achievable questions, it can shift my whole perspective and help me grow through it instead of survive through it.
Yeah. And that's one of the big things I do with my men's coaching is I talk about, it's easy to be in survival mode, but, really and truly, God made us to thrive. Now, that may look different for a lot of different people. The key of it being that he's with us. And anywhere he's with us, we can thrive.
Yes, absolutely.
And, but there's so many people that it breaks my heart that, because I've been there and I've done that, we're just surviving each day. Every day just kind of just happens to us.
Yeah.
We feel like we have no control, and really realizing that, okay, when you start that conversation with our Maker, he cares enough to lift you out of that pit. And we've experienced that in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Because we can see that, like Jesus says, he came that we might have life and life abundant.
Yeah.
So 100%, I'm going to have a day where I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I'm feeling the abundant life today.
Right.
But that can be a conversation starter. Hey, Jesus, where am I disconnecting between this? What does this mean? What am I, and that's a beautiful thing. It might be as simple as go eat protein and go on a walk and drink water and then take a nap and then listen to Psalms and then just do that a few times and you're going to feel like an amazing human again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, there's scripture to back that up too.
Yes.
Never underestimate the power of a nap, or, lots of those points that maybe we don't think of as biblical, but there's stories in there to support it.
Absolutely.
I want to kind of close our time together by talking about, okay, we're asking questions, but I want to hit on that opposite side too. All right. So let's talk about being present with others that are answering these questions.
Yeah.
But that's a big part of the conversation. So part A is asking the question. Part B is being present enough to hear the answer. Can you talk through that just a little bit and help us think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you're thinking through that. John Knox said that we cannot antagonize and influence at the same time. And we know what it's like to be attacked with a question, don't we?
Right.
Like, what were you thinking? Are you going to wear that? How could you be so rude? These are questions, but they are weaponized questions. And so it helps me so much if before I ask a question, I do what we were talking about initially, which is remind myself that this person I'm talking to is someone made in the image of God. And if they're a believer, then they are indwelt with the Holy Spirit. And those are two beautifully orienting things for me to go into a conversation with. And then I love a prayer that my pastor has taught me, which is, I call it the include me prayer. And it's a simple acknowledgement that Jesus is already at work in the space that we're walking into.
Right.
He's already there, already present. And we get to ask him, Jesus, would you include me in what you're already doing? And when I breathe that prayer before I go into a potentially hard conversation, man, it's a totally different conversation.
It's a game changer.
It is. And so then being aware of body posture and positioning and eye contact and facial expressions. And when I'm aware of those things, then just those simple things can really communicate to someone else. I hear you and I'm listening.
Yeah.
And I love the reminder that in that conversation, I'm not being asked to edit their responses. And so instead of editing their responses, which I'm great at because I'm an editor, right? Instead of editing their responses, I can ask follow-up questions. Follow-up questions like, can you tell me more? Or how did you come to that conclusion? Or what's another example of that? Or different words that might explain that same idea. And when we ask questions like that, the conversation becomes so different. And it's really a discovery-based conversation. So when we're listening to ask follow-up questions.
Sure.
And I think we can have an amazing conversation with just one question. Like you might ask a question and then I might share something and then it becomes this great back and forth that's just natural where we're both listening to each other and we don't even have to ask another question. And so, questions by themselves, they're just trivia. But the goal is a deeper relationship and building that resilient relationship with someone else in that
I love
way.
it. So, openness. That's the word that really and truly comes to mind. And, on so many levels, I relate to that and I agree with that. I love the work that you're doing. Keep being awesome. You guys check out her book. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about where people can find you.
Absolutely.
And, anything you're up to these days in the world.
So my book is called The Question Habit, and you can find it at thequestionhabit.com. And that also is a good launching point to find me on socials or on online on my blog, other places. I also have a podcast that you can reach from there, but it's thequestionhabit.com. And really it's this belief in this audacious idea that God put us right where we are with intention, and that has the possibility and really amazing result of changing the world, because that's what Jesus does. And so, that's who I am and what I do. And I'm a fan of what you're doing, Chad. So thanks.
Well, awesome. And, it's all about getting the most potential out of the time and the space you're given, and asking the right questions in the right way and listening to the response is one powerful way that we can get a lot of potential out of where God put us. And so, well, thanks again. This has been such a privilege. You guys check out Mandy and the work she's doing, and look forward to seeing you continue to put out wonderful content and change the world one question at a time.
Thanks so much, Chad.
Thank you for listening to the RevRx podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.